Hi everyone, welcome to our last class of the semester where we'll be covering any new material. Next week on, what is that, the 20th I believe, at our normal class time at 3:30 we will meet via Zoom to go over the review for the final exam. Please don't miss that class. It would be very difficult to pass that test without going over that review. There are a number of things that we haven't talked about in detail for a few weeks, and the fact that we've been doing this remotely for the past few adds another wrinkle on it. So 3:30 on April 20th, Monday, 3:30. An invitation will go out. You'll get an email with the link to click. And I do recommend that you download that app prior to the class because it does take a couple of minutes to download and install if you haven't used it before. If you have, you're already set. I also strongly recommend that you do not try to do that class on your phone. It's going to be way too difficult to see what it is that you need to see. A laptop, a tablet, or a desktop computer is definitely recommended over a phone. If a phone is all you have, you'll have to make do, but you're going to struggle a little bit to see what it is that we're going to be talking about. So anyway, that's next week. This week, our final class, like I said, with new material, we're going to cover two related topics. They're shadows and silhouettes. There's some confusion between the two sometimes as to what is a shadowed image and what is a silhouette. And in truth, they do cross over quite a bit. There's there are a number of images. They could be considered either or both. In the resources folder on Sakai, I have uploaded these two documents, which will help you a little bit. One is on shadows, one is on silhouettes. There's some examples of each. It's difficult to read. I don't know if this is going to help. No, it's difficult to read on screen because of the resolution that I'm recording this at. But if you go into the resources folder under documents, you'll find these two on shadows and silhouettes. Just kind of read them over. They'll give you a little bit of an overview of the two topics and should give you a pretty good starting point. Excuse me. So let's take a look at some examples. And we'll start with the easy one first, silhouettes. So basically what a silhouette is where your subject in the foreground is all black. And it's a pretty easy technique to achieve this. You just basically need more light on the background than you have on the foreground, and you expose for the background. So in the case of doing something outside, the sky is obviously the easiest way. If the sun or the light source or the main portion of light is behind the subjects, that's the easiest way to do this. And like I said, you expose for that background and just let the foreground go into a complete cutout. This can be done in a studio environment as well. It can be done indoors, but it is a little easier to do it outside, and you'll see some examples of that. A lot of these are done at sunrise or sunset, and this is it's pretty close. It's not a true perfect silhouette because you can see some detail in that structure, but it still kind of qualifies. So you'll be looking for unusual subject matter, something that maybe will catch the light and add a little bit of extra drama to that, like the lower portion of this image does. And again, exposing for the background makes the subjects go to a silhouette. Again, they're not always pure and perfect silhouettes. You do see some detail, especially in that balloon on the right. But it's a really cool image, very monochromatic. And I do want you to pay attention to some of the other techniques that we've talked about. So in this case, we have a single dominant color. We've just come off of working on color images. And this is a very, like I said, monochromatic. Compositionally, it's very interesting. The ridges do act as somewhat of leading lines to take you over to the balloons, which are off-center. Particularly over in near that 1/3 area on the right-hand side. So there's a couple of things about each of these images that make them unique. It's not just the silhouette part. So again, here we go. Not only is the image exposed for the background, but using a very, very shallow depth of field by using a wide aperture blurs that background out to the point where the subject stands apart even a little bit more. So, this would have been at f2, 2.8, 4, something like that on whatever lens was used. Not much to say about this. Again, the background does not have to be the sky. In this case, it's water, but the exposure is done for the water, which gives a really, really deep color effect. Again, it's obviously sunrise or sunset, probably sunset, and which is what gives you that color on the water on the back. And the diagonal of the shoreline helps as well. Very simple image, just a single light placed in the bathroom, and then a color. The image itself is colorized over top of that. Again, not a true silhouette, not a complete silhouette, but still qualifies. This one's kind of interesting. It looks more like an illustration or a drawing than a photograph, and it probably is. But compositionally, it's really cool. We create tension because the girl and her dog are about to walk out of the frame as opposed to walking into the frame. So it creates, a little bit of tension by the fact that she's so close to the edge. Plus, she's being pursued by all these, shadowy figures. So you kind of feel like she doesn't have any room to get away. Pretty interesting, even though it is, like I said, probably a painting or an illustration. Again, exposing for the background, but very, very unusual composition on this one. The placement of the subjects right at the bottom kind of creates a little bit of a, just a little bit of an unusual composition. And again, a little bit of tension because they're leaving the frame instead of entering the frame. And then finally, you can actually use the sun if you ever find it. These days, we're having a lot of rain lately. And using the sun to backlight your subject, that's probably the easiest way to go into silhouette. So those are some examples of silhouettes. Like I said, they're a little easier to understand because they're typically just a cutout of an image against a background. Shadows, on the other hand, can be a number of different things. So let's take a look at those. So first thing is that, we use shadows and highlights in photography to give us the illusion of 3 dimensions, because essentially we're dealing with 2 dimensions. We have height and width, and we don't really have depth in a screen image or a photograph or whatever. So we use shadows to simulate that 3 dimension, and it tells our brain, yes, this is not a flat subject. It's being lit from overhead, which causes shadows to go down. And it fills in a few blanks. Oops, hang on, we want to go. All right, so we want to start. I'll back up here just in a second. Anyway, it just helps our brain out a little bit by telling it what it is that we're looking at as opposed to trying to figure it out. Sometimes shadows can be not as dramatic, but they're definitely an integral part of the image. In this case, not only is the girl casting a shadow, but the other structures on the wall, everything on the ground. And you notice that she's looking in the direction of the sun because otherwise her face would be in shadow as well. So sometimes shadows may not be as distinct as they are in some images, but this would still qualify as a shadow image. This is kind of a fun one. You may or may not show the actual subject, but in this case, you kind of need it to see the playfulness that this image has. Shadows being cast, obviously the sunlight coming through trees on this one. Again, model's face is turned in the direction of the light. You can see based on the shadows off of the windowsill and off of her body where the light is actually coming from. But notice that her face is in an area that is not hit by that splotchy sunlight. We don't have shadows and sunlight both on her face. She's fully lit by sunlight. And if you look closely, you can definitely see that light is coming from overhead. And again, the shadows are telling us that a little bit off to the side, not as much as it's more overhead than it is off to the right. Sometimes the subject of this image is not the shadows themselves, but they certainly play a part. If you envision this image, same location, same angle at a different time of day, it would not have nearly the same impact. It's the shadows that create that impact. Another monochromatic image. This is probably in processing that this was created this way. But backlit again, sun is causing, again, you could make a case for saying that this is a silhouette as well. And definitely it's one of those crossover type images, but wherever you put it, shadow or silhouette, it kind of fits the bill. So sometimes images can be really simple and yet really dramatic. So this is a really cool graphic image that is shot with an overhead light that is a very, very hard light source, like a spotlight type of light to give a really, really crisp shadow. This wouldn't work, obviously, with a softer or broader light source, but something that's very, very intense and very, very focused would do this. And it's a really cool, again, compositionally, look at all the angles and triangles that are built into this, and diagonals, even the diagonal of the wall here, cutting across those shadows. Very, very cool graphic image. The fact that it's done in black and white, again, reduces the elements in the photograph and just reduces it to a much more graphic state. This is kind of a common image that you'll see sometimes done at a wedding. It could be any type of a ring. Obviously, the shadow created here is not from that ring. This is a little bit of Photoshop magic, I would imagine, done to give it a little bit of a heart shape. But still, and again, a black and white image, so I've seen this done 1,000 times, but it's still a pretty good image. The shadows can sometimes be, again, a very integral part of the image, but not the subject themselves. The legs and the feet are clearly the subject, but again, taking this down. Now, this one is not in black and white. Might have been interesting in black and white, but I think what's interesting is that you've got the warm skin tones set against the cooler background, which is a little more neutral. So I think this image probably works better in color than it would in black and white. Sometimes the shadows themselves are the image. You have to kind of figure out, based on what you're seeing, what the shadow is. Obviously, these are people, but who are they? Where are they? What are they doing? Why are they lined up that way? Again, we've got a little bit of a diagonal cutting across here with lines coming in from the opposite direction. So the shadows actually act as leading lines to the subjects, which are the shadows on that wall. Shadow can sometimes, and I apologize, I hope no one's offended by this, I just tend to shoot a lot of this kind of stuff. Shadows can be, how do I want to say, again, this girl's torso is primarily in shadow. She is rim lit from both the right and the left and the back side, but the face is in shadow, which adds a little bit of mystery to it. and just gelling those lights. This is a background that was added later, so to make it look like it's a little more real, that's why there's a warm gel on the light that's hitting her from this side, and a cool gel or no gel, I'm not sure, I can't remember, on this side to better match the background and the warm and cool tones in the background. But a lot of shadow in the image, but still very recognizable for what it is. Same kind of an idea here. Again, you could make a case for this being a silhouette. It's not a true silhouette, but there is a lot of shadow, and it's all because the lighting is behind the subject as far as where the camera position is. So you can, like I said, you can achieve very similar effects between shadows and silhouettes based on where you put the light source. These lights are a little bit further forward than directly behind her. Directly behind her would have definitely created a full silhouette. These are a little more off to the side. Single light source here, but again, overhead and behind the subject, and it reduces what we're looking at here to almost a landscape. The torso becomes more like rolling hills in a landscape when it's lit this way. A lot of texture comes out, obviously, when you light it this way, and then reducing it to black and white. Notice the unusual crop. Again, going with the subject matter here and not sticking with, the standard 3:2 ratio that the camera shoots. So again, just pointing out a lot of the little techniques that I want you to remember in all the photographs that you do. This one's kind of funny, very humorous. So obviously photoshopped. Not all that well, to be honest with you. The contact shadow under that cat is not very good. The lighting on the cat's not very good. But the overall effect is really cool. So we've got a lion shadow, sort of like this is what the cat feels he is. And the other thing that was done well is that the cat is enclosed within the shadow of the lion on the back, so it makes the cat stand out just a bit more. Again, shadows being the subject, backlit, shadows coming towards the camera, and because of the light source being right about here, back in this area, it's casting shadows in different directions, which gives us that diagonal again. Plus the bricks, if you look at the bricks, the way they are, not only diagonally in the image, but we've got these darker rows which create these X patterns, which just contrast against those shadows very, very well. And then finally, an image where the shadows themselves are again the subject. We're not really looking so much at the wall or the archway. It's really the shadows which get our attention here. So between those two, I hope you have a little bit better understanding. What we're trying to do in both cases, in this case anyway, in the shadow case, we're actually creating more dimension and depth and trying to recreate 3 dimensions. Whereas with silhouettes, we are sometimes more reducing it to back to 2 dimensions. There's no right or wrong. They both have their place. But for your assignment for next week, I would like you to create an image, one of each, or at least one of each. One shadow and one silhouette. The deadline will be, actually I'd like to have this, if we could, I'd like to have it by class time on Monday so we can go over the last critiques together. So let's go back to our original 1 p.m. deadline on Monday the 20th for that assignment. And the class that we will do next week on the review will not be probably a full 2.5 hour class like it would have been if we were meeting face to face, but it will be whatever it takes to go through the material and make sure that everybody feels comfortable with it. So if you have any questions, feel free to email or text me. I'm not as available as most people right now. Most people are pretty much stuck in their homes, and unfortunately, because of one of the jobs that I have, I am out every single day. And actually a little busier than normal, but I'm still available at some point during the day. So again, text or email, and I will respond as soon as possible. All right, guys, thanks, and we will see you on the 20th.